Hi, Andrew. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Thank you for joining me today to talk about your film White Elephant, and it's been doing the rounds at local festivals here in Canada. But before we start talking about the film, maybe a little bit of introduction about your background as a filmmaker or as an artist.
Sure. Yeah. I've been writing, directing for probably almost 10 years now.
Mhm.
I've made a few short films. I started with a big web series project.
Mhm.
That was my first major project when I started in production. I also have a background in development and distribution. That's where I started in the film industry. But yeah, I started producing my own work about 10 years ago. But my latest project is my first feature film, which is called White Elephant, and that's just doing the rounds at the film festivals in Canada. But we'll be making our international premiere very soon. So we
Oh,
just
great.
recently played at the Canadian Film Fest, which
Mhm.
was just played actually a few days ago on the Super Channel.
Mhm.
So we were really excited about that. But the Canadian Film Fest is still happening till the 18th, I believe. So there's a
That's
lot of
right.
great films.
That's right. It's a lot of great films, and it was a good chance for some of us that missed your film at Real World or
Definitely.
Relation earlier last year, I should say. So it's nice to be able to catch up with a fellow Torontonian and also somebody who grew up around the same time I did,
Yeah.
from the vibes in White Elephant. So I understand that the film itself sort of came out of a sort of an exhibition. Is that right?
Yeah. So it started as part of an exhibition at a local art gallery in
Mhm.
Markham for the Varley Art Gallery.
Mhm.
The exhibition was about having the artists tackle communities that were not necessarily their own. So I had chosen the South Asian community. I'm Chinese Canadian myself, so
Mhm.
I chose a community that I felt was adjacent to Chinese culture, so that there's some familiarity from my perspective.
Mhm.
My parents were also born in India, so I had a lot of familiarity with Indian culture, and I
Mhm.
grew up around a lot of Indo-Canadians. I had a lot of Indo-Canadian friends, so I was very. I felt like a kinship with the community, so I felt like I could portray it authentically. Because obviously, as a BIPOC filmmaker, it's really important to me to authentically portray communities. So that was really important to me when we made the film. Like a big
Right.
part of the exhibition was to integrate the community into the project. So we did that as much as we can in terms of my research,
Right.
involving the actors and behind the scenes as well. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, so that's how the project really came about from that exhibition. We just had a work in progress film that was kind of previewed at that exhibition. We
Right.
finished the full feature by the world premiere at the Real World Film Festival.
Very nice. And I appreciate the plot in the film because I, as a BIPOC person myself, I related to the different characters in different ways. I wasn't quite fully Pooja in terms of, but I was also sort of a little bit of her friend, her best friend, the girl, Manpreet, in the sense of, trying to find their identities as teenage girls in a mixed sort of neighborhood. So maybe my curiosity is about, choosing to have these really great female kind of leads in the film. Was that something that sort of happened when you were writing, or was it more when you were casting?
It was like I pretty much decided that when I was writing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I haven't been asked that question a lot, and I don't, and I'm not afraid to answer like why I chose
Yeah.
to write female characters. Yeah, I just felt like a lot of the experience was pulled from my own high school experience, but I just felt like through female characters, I had a lot more flexibility in terms of portraying the emotions that I wanted to convey. That emotional turmoil you feel
Right.
as a teenager. I thought it was like more easily expressed through female characters.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I had male characters go through some of the events that happen in the film, I just felt like it would be a lot more. There would be a lot more, I would say, toxic masculinity. And that was something I wanted to avoid, because that wasn't a theme I necessarily wanted to tackle, right?
Right.
It was more about being caught in that cultural identity crisis that you have growing up between, you know, what you're seeing on TV and what you're experiencing and consuming in media versus what you're actually experiencing in your reality, in your real life. I wanted to portray that, you know, being caught in the middle there, and as an Indo-Canadian, like what that is like, trying to, you know, fit in and assimilate in a society that is predominantly not represented by you in the media. So, but yeah, that was the main reason why I chose female characters. But again, I have the same approach when I write female characters. Like I do a lot of research. I mean, I collaborated a lot with the actors. So Zareen Bushra, who plays Pooja, and Gurleen Singh, who plays Manpreet. Like I consulted with them a lot, like during the table read and rehearsal process, to ensure that the characters felt authentic. And I even allowed them to like build their characters a little bit, right? And the dialogue was often run by them, and I allowed them to, you know, have their input and make sure that the conversations felt authentic and that it was natural. So I think that helped in terms of getting the authenticity across for those people.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I have no issues with you writing the female characters. I actually like how they were written, because I did find myself relating to them, as I mentioned, for different reasons. And I also appreciated, I did watch the interview that the cast did for Real World, and they were so appreciative of the experience. And they also mentioned that you did allow them to be more involved in terms of like character development, like what would it feel like for me in this character? And I think you kind of nailed that with their contributions and the fact that they felt that they own that character in a way, right? So
yeah, and I'm glad that you were able to, or that resonated. You know, I that was our hope, right? Because at the end of the day, it's their characters, right? And you know, film is a collaboration, so it's not about me and what I'm trying to say. Like they're all artists in themselves, and they want to express what they want to express as well. So I was very open to that.
Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you kind of have used this 90s sort of rom-com vibe with the visuals, like how we start and we kind of get the music with the teenage girl in her room, bored out of her mind. She doesn't know what she's doing. But then the film takes us in a different direction a little bit, even though there's that element of, you know, her trying to, you know, find her Romeo in a way, and her love of different films and you know what film means to her. And just on the topic of film, I appreciated the conversation she had with her father about Bollywood films. So was this sort of thread of films and how they would sort of be a part of Pooja's life something that was also kind of part of your life growing up?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's some of the stuff that I lifted from my own experience, right? Like I was very much into pop culture and very much into movies. I was a huge comic book fan as well. So it's like all I did growing up was consume media, right? So I just felt like the experiences that I kind of portrayed in the film is like how consuming media can really affect the way we perceive things and how we experience our realities, you know? So, and how there's like, you know, a cyclical feedback in terms of like what we consume in media and how we actually behave in real life. Right. Like it's not like two separate things where you can just, you know, watch entertainment and then just live your life as a separate thing. Like they kind of bleed into one another. So I kind of wanted to show like all the stuff that she was consuming in the background where, you know, when she references a lot of movies and then you have the whole title sequence of her, you know, showing that she watches movies and TV all the time, that like, this is how it's kind of translated in her perception towards these white people that she's seeing for the first time in her neighborhood and her perceptions about them. Right. So, but yeah, there was definitely things that I pulled from my own experience because I was like a huge like pop culture buff growing up. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because it is very much related to this generation of young people that were either that were born here and their parents come from abroad, is sort of this dynamic of trying to find a balance in terms of belonging to your culture, but also being part of mainstream society or white culture, right?
Yeah.
Especially in areas like Scarborough or Markham. I lived in St. Jamestown downtown, which is a very diverse neighborhood. So that's where I related to in terms of the characters.
My parents, like when they moved here, we started in St. Jamestown.
Yeah.
And then they moved to Scarborough, and then yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like some of my classmates that I lost in elementary school.
Yeah.
But people went east. But so I do appreciate that we're seeing our city on screen without really seeing our city. But we do sort of really have these shared experiences. Like you said, you're writing from the perspective of being, having grown up with South Asians in your community. So I did find that there was a lot of nuances that you all got right, and reminded me of some of my friends growing up. The dialogue I found really relatable as well, even from the male characters, like when we have, who is it? I think it's Amit and Rohit. And they have the dialogue of like the tough guy and, I have to protect you. And, those kinds of things, they really resonated with me in terms of, the young people that I grew up with. So I wanted to just mention that. I also, in terms of just talking about, the themes of identity and finding your way around, I think this is what the film is about, in the sense of, through Pooja in a way and her friends, like her immediate group of friends. How do you reconcile, all of this media consumption with what you are growing up with? Is that sort of, am I getting it right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that comes through. I mean, that was a big part of what the film was about thematically, like trying to reconcile like that, your cultural identity and at the same time what you're seeing on TV and media, right? Because they don't line up. And I think when they don't line up with your reality, doesn't line up with what you're seeing on TV, it's confusing, right? Like you're like, I don't know what I should be. I'm getting these real life influences with my friends that I spend time with on a daily basis.
Right.
But then when I watch TV, it's a completely different experience I'm witnessing on TV. So it's like, I think as a teenager, when you're trying to find your identity, it's like, I think young teenagers will mimic what they're seeing on TV. And at the same time, they're getting all these influences in real life. So there's this weird like mixture that they can't really reconcile. So it kind of makes finding your identity as a teenager more difficult, I find. So that was a big theme in the film, where trying to reconcile your, adolescent identity on top of your cultural identity. So it creates an additional layer that, us as BIPOC kids, like how to really figure out who we are, especially in the larger context of Western society,
Yeah. And I think because you've said it in this mid-90s era, that sort of captures that generation, which includes someone like myself, of like, having grown up in this, we didn't have social media. We weren't as connected to each other in that sense. And I think our versus young people today and their self-identity, I think maybe they're navigating it a little bit more clearly than maybe we did,
No, I 100% agree. Right. Like, I think that's partly why I wanted to set it in the 90s, not only because that was my experience, but also because I think it really emphasized and heightened the fact that we were really insulated in that experience, like perceiving things on TV and film and our experience in real life, where I think today, because of the internet, we're seeing a lot of more globalized experiences. So we don't feel as alone, right? Like we're seeing different experiences everywhere. So we can kind of latch on to what we want to, relate to. But back then it was only like Friends on TV. That's all we can relate to. What else can I relate to? Kind of thing. So I think it's a little bit easier for the younger generation today because of the changes that have been happening in media.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm grateful to be able to have lived across this time span and see the
Yeah.
differences, right? And also being able to appreciate work like yours, because I think it also will resonate with young people now too. And I
I hope
think
so.
members of your cast said that as well, that they found that it was resonating with their age group and young audiences.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's still relevant today, right? Like, I think that's just more of like that's why by setting it in that time, it kind of just heightens like that feeling, right? I think that feeling still exists today, where we just want representation, we want to see our lives reflected on screen, but seeing how the stark like difference and contrast back then, it kind of brings that theme more to the forefront, right? We can really see it by placing it in that time, in that era, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, now I'm kind of getting to the point of where I'm curious about the production side of things as well, because I like the length of the film. It's not too long, but it's not short. At least for the subject matter, I think it works. Was there anything that you wanted to include but you didn't get to include for reasons of budget or time?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's like I would have loved for the film to be longer. Like if I were honest with you, right? Because there were things that I would have loved to explore a little bit deeper. But being an independent filmmaker is tough in Canada, right?
Sure.
Like the money isn't there, the budget isn't there. So and being that I mostly self-produce my own work, that's always something that I have to be a little bit conscious of, because we just don't have the money to really expand on a lot of things. I mean, I'm happy with the work that we did, but you know, I always look back and be like, I wish I could have done a scene about this, a scene about that, right? So, I mean, there would have been things specifically that I would have wanted to do in terms of Pooja and Trevor's relationship. I would have liked to have expanded that a little bit more and have them and actually see them spend a little bit more time with one another and not just be kind of in passing sort of thing.
Right.
And I would have liked to see Pooja more at home, her home life with her, not just her father, but maybe her mom. Or I mean, I've written backstories with the characters, so she also has a brother, right? But that's never addressed in the film. So those are things I would have loved to explore a bit deeper, right? And just exploring those things, as well as just heightening the drama and just creating bigger stakes. I would have loved to do, but you know, it's difficult when you don't have a lot of resources. But I'm happy with what we did at the end of the day.
Me too. And I think it's important to have these discussions because a lot of us are wanting to see more of ourselves on screen, and it really is about the opportunity for people like yourself to be able to develop these stories, right?
Exactly.
So hopefully this will be a vehicle to maybe expand on the same story or do something else that's, you know, that's close to your heart. So, but I agree. I think it works in terms of the length, and I think we get the message across. You get the message across, I should say, and we receive it. So, but I was curious because I think it also left me wondering, hey, could this be maybe like a series or, you know, it kind of had that vibe, like I mentioned, of the 90s, where I could see it being a little bit of maybe a mini series or a longer film.
I mean, I actually, for a moment, I did think about that. I was like, you know, these characters probably could live in a series format, right? So that wouldn't be out of the question. Like if that ever gained any interest or garnered any interest, I would, you know, think about that. I don't know if I could ever use the same actors because they've all kind of grown up already, you know, but you'd have to start a little bit from scratch. Right.
But it leaves it open, right? For it to have life maybe in the future, or maybe, like you said, a new concept in terms of young people and representation. I was curious about your choice of music as well. Did you, was that something that, did you have in mind where you, the kind of the sound, the music?
I did, yeah. I mean, the music was really important to me. I wanted to distinctly find music that had a 90s feel. And more specifically, the type of music that I was listening to back then. And I listened to a lot of rock music. I was like an obsessed Canadian rock fan. So like that was my Canadian experience, right? Like listening to all this Canadian rock. So you'll notice there's a lot of rock that
Mhm.
Pooja listens to.
Yeah.
And some of the bands I specifically chose because I felt like they had a 90s style, you know. But yeah, so it was very specific in my choice.
Mhm.
There's also a large part of the film. There's music by a Australian. They're like a fusion of Indian slash 70s style funk music, right?
Mhm.
Which a lot of the lyrics are actually in Hindi and Bengali, right?
Mhm.
So those were tracks that I specifically chose when Pooja kind of bridges that identity
Mhm.
when she starts moving towards understanding who she is,
Right.
and being a little bit more consciously aware of her cultural identity. So you'll hear a lot more of their songs by the end of the film.
Right.
But earlier in the film, it's all like standard
Mhm.
rock music, because that was her soundtrack growing
Right.
up in high school. So
Mhm.
yeah, they were all very specifically chosen.
Okay, that makes sense, because I did pick up on the sound a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up with more hip hop and rap, but
Yeah.
I'm very much aware of the Canadian rock sound.
I mean, it's funny
We
because
have
like
to.
I know, like all my friends growing up listened to hip hop, rap, and R&B. But I was like Pooja, and that's where I lifted it a lot from my experience, where I was the odd one out.
Right.
I was listening to rock, and I was that like black sheep. Like, so Manpreet, Amit, Rohit, they're like the hip hop, R&B, rap kids, and as well as Jamie. And then Pooja was that like one that stuck out, that would just only listen to rock and was more interested in that white media, right? I was that kid too, because I had the same, cultural identity crisis that she does.
Sure,
right? That's where I lifted a lot from my own experience.
Yeah, I know, and I think we all kind of, and I say we meaning BIPOC, because I also had friends who were listening to music I wasn't listening to, but then I would listen to some other stuff and would exchange, like we would exchange sort of like the love of music and movies too, because I was the odd one out when it came to film. So
really?
That's where I related to Pooja, where, she wanted to just absorb movies of, and go outside of her neighborhood to go be able to listen to a film and not have rowdy crowds, right?
So you watch obscure artsy films? Is that?
I did, I was lucky to have an older cousin that would also take me along and introduce me to some foreign stuff, and this is where I'm at today in terms of my cinephilia, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just really appreciative of those sort of layers within your characters, as much as it is about Pooja finding, a little bit of a balance in her identity and like self-love, essentially, because it really is about her just accepting herself. I like the layers that you gave the characters along with your actors, because again, from the interview that I saw, they seemed really appreciative, even from the young man who plays Trevor, Jesse. He also mentioned he learned quite a bit through this experience. So
he did, which was great. That's kind of a byproduct of like when you make a film like this, there's like an education involved for everybody as well. So I mean, it was great. I was really happy to see that.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm kind of mindful of time, but I didn't want to leave out Dave Lamb, somebody that who was your cinematographer, and did you and him discuss sort of the look of the film in terms of, shots that you wanted and, any references to other films that you use for inspiration?
Yeah, for sure. We had a lot of discussions. I mean, I wish we got way more detailed because we were under a time crunch. But yeah, I sent him a lot of references of 90s films. I sent him like specific like reference shots in terms of like giving it that little bit of a vintagey look.
Right.
So we talked about that a lot. So for camera nerds, like there's like specific filters, lens filters that he used to give it that like, that has that like dreamier quality to it, that makes it look a little bit older. But yeah, so I wanted it to look like a film that was actually made in the 90s.
Right.
So that was my goal. and in terms of framing and composition, like there is somewhat of a TV feel to it intentionally, because she's watching all these TV shows.
Right.
She's into that sort of thing. So, yeah, I wanted to capture like that feel that we get when we watch those old 90s teenage dramas, rom-coms, that sort of thing. But yeah, so we did talk a lot about that, and we did go through a lot of references in terms of the look. For sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's interesting that you mentioned the TV feel, because there's a couple of scenes that remind you of the original Degrassi in a way.
Yeah, right.
So again, it's just, these are the things that we pick up when we watch something that is made by local
for sure
directors. So it's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice. I just wanted to point that out. I also noticed that when you mentioned that dreamy look, it kind of reminded me of that Romeo and Juliet film that she likes, Pooja likes, and I guess that's sort of maybe one of the influences here.
Yeah. I mean, those scenes are obviously lifted from Romeo and Juliet, right? Like that was a film that specifically at the time in the 90s, came out in the 90s. So that kind of just served as a representation in her head of what she thought or perceived, a love story can be in her life, where it's like you think the things that you see on TV is something that real people experience, especially as a teenager, right? Or you believe that's something that can actually happen. But yeah, so when she has those dreams, it's a kind of a representation of that, and how like the things that she's watching and consuming kind of, enter her subconscious, right? So, but yeah, those two dream scenes were literally like line by line and shot by shot. We almost like tried to get it as close as we could.
Right. Yeah, they very much are kind of something I would imagine she would dream about, So I'm curious, you mentioned something before we kind of started our chat about the film moving towards a release. Can you share any details about that?
I mean, I can't say yet what festival is up next, but we do have a festival lined up, which should be our international premiere. So far, we've only played at Canadian festivals.
Right.
So hopefully we can take this a bit wider, right? I know the challenge is I was very unapologetic in its Canadianness, right? So we'll have to see whether it resonates in the same way, right? Like, a lot of the slang and language is very specific to Toronto, right? So I've sent it to some of my American friends, and they're like, I don't know what to make of this. Like, I didn't know this is what neighborhoods were like in Toronto. It's very jarring for them. So we'll see what the response is once we have our premiere in the US. Specifically, it's the US, but but yeah, we'll be announcing that soon. That'll be in May.
Okay, cool. So, I'm looking forward to the announcement. So how do I keep up with the news about the film so I can share? Yeah,
for sure. You can follow us on Instagram. It's white ELEF. No, sorry, ELEPH. No, I'm getting the Twitter. That's the Twitter.
That's Twitter, okay.
White Elephant Film is Twitter.
Okay.
Our Instagram is White Elephant Film.
Got it. So the whole title.
Yeah. Twitter doesn't allow that length.
That's the length for sure. Okay, so I'll be sure to tag you on once this video goes live. So
for sure.
Thank you, Andrew. This was really enlightening, and congratulations.
Thank you, Heidi. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Thanks.